got quite a lot of people already chatting on the Q&A. I'm not going to be involved in this. I'm going to hand over to the amazing chair and panel. So first, let me just introduce Shivani Dave. So Shivani is a non-binary presenter, journalist and comedian. After studying physics at university, Shivani went on to work at the BBC, where they started working in news, learned how to make fun of it, and now they present shows with a mix of eclectic music and cover stories that make a difference to people's lives. They do this all whilst cracking the odd joke and performing stand-up comedy to keep a smile on people's faces. So that sounds like a pretty good life, frankly. So I'll hand over to you, Shivani, and enjoy the session.
Thanks a lot. It's always a lot of pressure when someone says that I've done any comedy, because then the first thing people say is, tell us a joke then. But I'm the one asking the questions today, so that should be a little bit easier for me. We've got a great panel here to talk about the future of connectivity. We've got Neill, who is the city manager with CityFibre. Neill Campbell, a researcher from the University of Bath, who does some very complicated sciencey things that I do not understand, but I'm sure he can give me a bit more of an insight into. And Alex Gledhill, who is Intel's 5G specialist. Do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit more?
Yeah, happy to, Shivani. Thank you. As you mentioned, Neill Madle, I look after several builds in the area of the CityFibre. We're installing full fibre networks throughout about 100 towns and cities in the UK, including several in this region. And Swindon started about 4 months ago. So we've been in the town installing a full fibre network, which ultimately should be able to get to every town and business in the every home and business in the town and provide gigabit capable speeds for full fibre. So we handle that that connectivity into the homes and businesses, but we also, as we're laying the fibre, put the kind of bedrock in place, the infrastructure in place to support 5G rollouts. So that obviously we're heavily involved with 5G as well.
That's good, because we do have a 5G specialist, so I don't want you both to be butting heads. Alex, tell us a bit more about your work.
Yeah, hi Shivani. Hello everyone today. Thank you for having me. So I'm Alex Gledhill, and I'm part of Intel's communication service provider organization. And I spend almost all of my time working with Vodafone on their network. And I'm here today because I'm really passionate about 5G. And I'm excited about the world that it can enable.
Fantastic. And Neill, you actually do some of the more academic techie stuff behind this. So what does that all involve?
Oh, great. Thanks very much. Yeah, so I'm not really the so I'm coming from the point of view of mostly everyone else. So we use the technology that gets spread out, and it changes the way that we can operate. And so I'm here from the research center at the University of Bath, and we look at working with the creative industries. And so one of the people who make films, entertainment, and we also do sort of sports science and rehabilitation and things like that. And it's the how connectivity and how the fact that we can compute lots of things, maybe away from your phone and things like that, send it back to you in real time. We can do on-set things, exciting things for films and things like that. So that's where I'm coming from in this, is the opportunities of high-speed connectivity can provide to all these kind of exciting applications. And so I can talk a bit about that.
That's awesome. So Neill Campbell, what differences are you seeing in terms of the enhanced connectivity with 5G that you might not have had with 4G or 3G?
So I think the main thing is it's almost an interesting thing. So one of my other areas is research in machine learning, and one of the I don't want this to be taken literally, but if you kind of look at sort of embodiment of things, if you look at human brains or something like that, we have lots of processing and inverted comma power in your head, but a very low bandwidth in and out of ourselves. So reading or seeing things, talking to people, this is all relatively slow force of communication, but we can think a lot in the intervening time. Whereas one of the interesting things about computers is that the rate of computation and the rate of communication between computers sort of goes up roughly at the same time. But that hasn't always been true for wireless communication. So if you're sitting in a big computer and you put another one next to it, you can make them talk to each other and share information very quickly. But now we can do that with your, I'm going to use a prop. You've got your phone, and your phone can provide a sort of a source of input that can get sent back, processed on a big computer somewhere, and come back again. Now really quickly, to the order of, oh, now instead of having to sort of run your computer game or something like that on your phone, actually some of these things can be run remotely and beamed there. Or in my case, for example, say we're on set filming for a movie, we can sort of capture images from multiple viewpoints. So you're filming a car chase or something like that, you've got lots of cameras, they can be streaming that information back. There's a center where they're doing the post-processing, putting all the different shots together and streaming that back. And in real time, a director can be sitting there looking at what's going on, changing the shot, changing camera angles as you're filming. And some of these things you don't want to film them 5 times because you're going to sort of destroy things or blow things up. And so you want to be able to sort of get that shot right the first time. And at the moment, we sort of do things, we do multiple takes, and then someone has to come and cut it together later on. And there's an opportunity for all those kind of things to happen in real time. And I think that's a good example of where it's a jump in connectivity. If we can do this, the sort of things we're doing now, these live videos and streams, but huge numbers of them at the same time and things like that, there's loads of applications for that.
That's awesome. That sounds incredible. And I definitely want to come visit you at work one day when things get back to normal, because that sounds incredible. But I mean, I don't use my phone, and I imagine lots of people don't use their phones to shoot explosions for movies and things like that. So Alex, do you think maybe you could tell me a little bit more about like what we'll be able to see in our lives and the impact of 5G?
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe if we just take a step back and just have a think about what 5G brings versus 4G, and then go to a few examples of the benefits that will bring. So, 5G is short for 5th generation mobile networks, and there are 3 things that 5G brings. Firstly, it's more speed. Secondly, it's more capacity. And thirdly, it's less latency. So I can give you, it's lower latency. So there's some numbers behind that: 50 times more speed, 1,000 times more capacity, and 10 times lower latency. But what does that mean? Why should you actually care for these things? So I think we understand speed. So an example on speed would be that on a 4G LTE connection, you can get a download speed of about 300 megabytes per second. What does that mean? It means you can download a film in about 2.5 minutes. Whereas on 5G, you'll be able to get speeds between 1 and 10 gigabits per second. So that's downloading a film within 4 to 40 seconds. Capacity is the other thing. So mobile networks use radio waves to transfer data, but 5G will use higher frequencies than 4G to do this. So higher frequencies mean larger bandwidths, and larger bandwidths mean more capacity. So you can get, as I said, more than 1,000 times more capacity. So an example on this one would be at a football game, and you're in the stadium, you want to check the football scores elsewhere. With all those other devices nearby, there's just too much clutter on 4G. Whereas what 5G does really well is in those high traffic, highly crowded areas where it's less affected by other signals around it. And then finally, it's latency. So latency is the time it takes a network to respond to a request. In 4G, the latency is about 50 milliseconds, and in 5G, it's going to be sub 50 milliseconds. There's even lots of planning to get it down to sub 1 millisecond. And what does this mean? And I think this links back to what Neill was just saying about, humans can be quite slow. What is sub 50 milliseconds? So studies have shown that the best human brains can compute at about 30 milliseconds. If you've got an image in front of you, and the time it takes for your eye to process what that picture is, it takes about 30 milliseconds. So as you can see, and pun intended there, 5G is really fast, and you'll be able to see that latency on your phone, the example before as well, with minimal buffering when you're streaming media or gaming especially. But for me, and maybe this kind of goes into why is it important and what are those new use cases, it is those new use cases that can make the most of these three things, which will be most exciting. And a lot of these technologies and use cases haven't quite hit prime time yet. So things like autonomous vehicles or autonomous robots, they're able to think faster and be able to turn corners more quickly. And that is the benefit that 5G brings to those new use cases.
Yeah, I can't wait to actually go back to a stadium, you know, like you mentioned, a football stadium or concert or something, and be able to post my pictures from the event as they're happening, because it sounds like that might be possible. And what's like, is that it then? Is that like, it sounds like 5G is going to make everything so much faster than we can compute at the moment. Is that going to mean that we've reached the peak of connectivity? Neill, Madle, is this as far as technology has to go in terms of how fast we can communicate with each other?
I think there's going to be huge data demands. We can't even predict what they're going to be in the next 10 to 15, 20 years. So 5G is the right mobile technology for the moment. It may well be superseded at some point, but we can't really predict the future. The main thing is that there is already a huge growing demand, not just for mobile technology, but also for fixed home broadband increases in speed and latency and capability. So there's a lot of activity going on across the industry to try and support this, and 5G is part of that. And I would argue that it's a nice complementary technology to fixed full fiber to the home and business, because you know, what we tend to do is as we're out and about, we'll use the mobile technology, but as we go to and we've all done it, we go to somebody's home, or in pre-COVID times we go to a home, or we go to a pub or a restaurant or an office even, and the first thing we do is ask for the Wi-Fi password, because you want the Wi-Fi for the fixed broadband connection. So it's a complementary technology. You don't want to use up all the spectrum you're getting from 5G on home applications like streaming or Netflix or gaming, which are better provided over fixed fiber connectivity. So I think there's a combination of technologies all trying to meet this huge data demand that's going to be coming, and the sort of things Alex was talking about, like autonomous cars, you know, all the smart city applications that may come down the line. Who only knows what sort of data is going to be needed for that? So we do need to continue to improve capability in a number of different ways.
Yeah, and I think this takes us nicely to a question from the audience. It says, as 5G becomes more widely accessible, can we see the public moving to this for home broadband services rather than traditional fiber ADSL providers? Especially when you consider things like Starlink, which is on the rise, and traditional providers' subscription costs are pretty high. I've just had to sort out my broadband at home, and it is pretty expensive. And what I've noticed is that I can get an unlimited, albeit 4G package from my phone provider, my SIM provider. So do we think that maybe it's going to have to become more competitive for home broadband systems to try and encourage people to stay? Neill?
You want me to take that one as well? Yeah, I mean, I think that's already happening. There's more competition in home broadband through different infrastructure providers entering the space, through multiple ISPs on open access networks like the ones we're putting in. So that's driving down costs for fixed home broadband packages continuously. So that's going to happen anyway, just through the nature of competition. And I think it just it intuitively makes more sense to use that, but rather than taking up this spectrum, this 5G mobile spectrum, which is going to be great when you're out and about, intuitively makes more sense to use that sort of fixed fiber infrastructure when you're at home.
And is that because the fixed fiber infrastructure will be able to provide a more reliable connection as opposed to a 5G connection?
Yes, inherently more reliable, more stable, and in the same way as I say that we already do that when we go to somebody else's house, the first thing we do is ask for the Wi-Fi password, because we know it's going to get, the connectivity is going to be better than it would be if you use your mobile signal.
Yeah, and Alex, you do a lot of work with Vodafone, and I know Vodafone provide Wi-Fi for homes, but also a lot of data streaming sort of services through mobiles as well. Is that a shift? Is there a shift that you're seeing in your work there, or is it very much two separate infrastructures?
No, I think connectivity is, there's separation between fixed access and wireless access, but there's definitely a convergence that's happening both in the network and also out with consumers and with businesses. I think, like Neill said, if you have fiber to the home already, you're going to want to take advantage of that. Certainly, that's how it is at the moment. But if you don't, or it's cost prohibitive, or you have to dig up the streets, then the idea that you can get gigabit capability at home without laying cables, I think enables a whole experience more fast, much faster. It might not obsolete it, but can certainly aid it. And you see there's new offerings coming from Vodafone and others, which are around having a fixed fiber to the home, but also having a hybrid where if for whatever reason that's not delivering, then it falls back to 4G or 5G as an alternative connectivity solution, if something goes down in the network. I think a really nice example of an alternative to using cables was some work that Intel did with the US Open Golf, which is a tournament where they don't need cables and fixed access all of the time. And for the 7th hole, we delivered the live streaming in 4K for that part of the tournament over 5G using millimeter wave technology, which is that allows you to get that high bandwidth. And we didn't have the added time of all of the production costs and production time needed for running those cables. So I think there are use cases where it makes sense to use wireless if it can deliver on the needs of what you're trying to deliver.
Yeah, fantastic. But I think there's a question from the audience which is really interesting and really useful for a lot of people who might be watching this, and it's about the fact that there are still lots of towns and villages and places in and around the Swindon area that don't have great connection, whether that's cables or mobile connection through 3G and 4G. Should we really be investing in 5G and other technologies when in cities and towns there are still places that are really hard to get a good connection from? Alex, this might be one for you. Does 5G sort of mean that we're going to get further reaching connection, or is it just the hotspots where we've got great connection at the moment are going to be even better?
Yeah, I've been talking a lot about the kind of the higher end of the spectrum, those high frequencies, but part of what we expect to see in the 5G rollout, and the 5G rollout is over a decade, and part of that is at those lower frequencies. And the good thing about lower frequencies is that they reach further, which gives you the opportunity from the radio towers to get to communities that perhaps haven't been able to get the connection in the past. So it's very useful for rural locations as well as suburban and urban, where you're getting those higher frequencies which don't travel quite as far.
Forgotten to unmute myself there. Yeah, I want to sort of bring Neill Campbell back in a little bit, because you obviously use 5G and these high connectivities in your everyday life, or in your work at least. How long do you think it's going to be until all of our phones and laptops and everything that we use starts running on 5G capability at least?
Well, I'm not sure if I can sort of answer that, but I think it's from I think part of these things also come from a drive. So there's what the technology you can roll out, but people are the thing at the other end, what you want to use it for and things like that. And I guess examples where we've been looking at in the research center, we do lots of work on entertainment research, and it's sort of it's not sort of, oh, my phones are faster now or something, or I can download images on WhatsApp faster or something like that to share with friends. It's that you could do new things that you can't, especially this very low latency enables new types of activities. And I think something we've seen a lot during the pandemic, we're all isolated from each other, is trying to share experiences when you're remote from your friends. And rather than catching up with family, being, as we are here, in a sort of Zoom call, which now we all sort of associate with meetings and sort of working from home and things like that, perhaps there's sort of more immersive experiences that can happen. And so one of the demonstrations that my colleague Christian from the research center has at the festival is about VR. And there he's sort of showing that you can use sort of commodity cameras to capture the sort of 3D world around you, so the whole world. And then through headsets and things like that, you can sort of move your head around, really feel that you're there. You see the world in stereo. It looks like it's 3D. And if that's super low latency, so you can now, like, we could sit next to each other in a 3D room and talk to each other and share the sort of interactive experience. It isn't just staring at the screen or something like that. And it's those kind of technologies that need this very high bandwidth, but also very low latency communications, and are inherently remote. Like you go to the top of you walk to the top of a mountain or something like that, and you want to share it with your friends. Like, in the future, is that possible that we can sort of be standing there with your camera at the top, and I can sort of sit there at home and see and see, not just see what you're seeing in the sense of, oh, I've taken a picture, but experience to some extent what you're experiencing. And those kind of exciting, I think, are the sort of drivers at the other end, as we get excited about these kind of applications. And I've just said entertainment ones, there's loads in healthcare and all kinds of other things, as they are the pull for this kind of technology. And the more we see that kind of thing happening, I guess the greater the demand is, and the easier it is to roll out the technology.
Yeah, I mean, the entertainment thing is something that we can all sort of try and visualize in our own lives. Somebody's asked, obviously trying to picture the use of this technology in their own life. Is 5G the future of cloud gaming and online play on the go? Because obviously lots of people have their great setups, usually Ethernet their computers into their internet to get a fast stream and to make sure that they can play reliably. But is 5G going to make something like Pokemon Go be like Pokemon Go 2.0, like even better? Is that what you're thinking, Neill, Campbell?
Yes. So So in fact, some colleagues of mine from my previous research center are now working for Niantic. And whilst I personally don't understand the Pokemon part of it, I understand the technology behind the AR part of it. And I think that's what I was sort of hinting at before about the differences between sort of computing power that's on your phone or something like that, and computing power that's held remotely. And so it's not just that, oh, I could render a like a 3D experience or something on your phone with its very powerful graphics card now, but it's the fact that the experience is the connectivity of the people. Fundamentally, if you've got multiple people playing something, all these devices need to talk to each other, and they need to talk at very low latency in order for it to be a natural and instinctive thing. Otherwise it becomes a bit like chess, where I make a move and sit there waiting for you to make a move. So the faster this is, actually, rather than sort of, at the moment, most of these interactions are still sort of very local, and it's just you or maybe someone standing next to you or something for that kind of game. But as it gets faster and more and lower latency, you can start saying, well, thousands of people can be interacting in real time. You can sort of all be working collaboratively on a task. And I think there's a whole, certainly from the gaming structure, there's a whole new realm of exciting games and things like that will fall out from that.
Fantastic. You don't want to get in the car though and think you're playing Mario Kart, because that could lead to some pretty weird driving. Alex, did you sort of have something to add to this as well?
Yeah. I mean, for me, converging technologies unleash innovation, and I think what Neill was just saying there is that with 5G, you've got this true convergence happening of both computing and of communications. And it's the idea that everything that can and should be connected will be. So I tend to think of 5G as having revolutionary and evolutionary elements to it. So the evolutionary elements are that faster speed, using technologies enabled by, what did I mention earlier? I mentioned millimeter waves and massive antenna arrays and beamforming, all of these technologies. And I can't explain exactly what all of those things are either. But they're essentially technologies that give you more bandwidth and a faster speed. So they're evolutionary. But the revolutionary thing that is happening as well at this same point as these converge is that compute is getting much closer to the end point, getting to the edge of the network. And it's that point of either data creation or data consumption. And this can be that person-to-person communication, or a person communicating with their own data, where you're watching Facebook or Twitch or something like that. But you can get those lower latencies, less buffing, faster response time. But with something like edge computing plus fantastic connectivity, you can do things in VR like split rendering, where not only is your device rendering, but also the network, the compute on the network behind is rendering, which for the use case that the question was asking about of, am I going to be able to do gaming on the go? It's those new technologies that are enabled by this evolution of network and computing that are going to bring about all new types of gaming and immersive media. I mean, you joked about Mario Kart in your car there, Shivani, but we did a wonderful concept with Warner Brothers about the future of vehicles, and at a point in the future where you have autonomous vehicles that are driving you around, being in the back of a vehicle, what will you want to do? And maybe that's an immersive experience as well, where you're watching a film, or there's augmented reality that, things that you pass by, there's a description of what's happening. There's some amazing thought and research going into what's possible as connectivity comes into vehicles as well.
It sounds like there are things that are going to happen that we almost can't even imagine just yet because of the new capabilities that we'll be able to have. But with that in mind, with tech, people are always working on the next thing. So we're still seeing 5G rollout in the sense that not everybody has access to 5G yet. Even some of the people who consider themselves quite techie might not have a 5G enabled phone or something like that. But there are currently people working on the next thing, 6G, for example, 7G, maybe 8G. How long until this tech is sort of outdated? Is it pointless for me to get a 5G phone because I can wait a few years and get a 6G phone? Is that the sort of thing that, Alex?
I'm shaking my head as you say. I don't think it's going to take just a couple of years. Just looking back in history and the transitions from 2G to 3G to 4G to 5G, it's generally a decade between new generations, and we are in the early stages of 5G. It hasn't rolled out. There are new technologies that are being developed. The standards are set, but there's also evolutions of those standards that are still ongoing for the foreseeable future. But looking at at 6G, the development is underway already. There's research bodies coming together. Early papers are being written by those research groups on what 6G could deliver. There's a large group in America of big organizations, both technology companies and people like car manufacturers as well, that are that have come together to decide what is that. They're calling it the next G is that group. And even China have sent a satellite into orbit that they are calling a 6G satellite, where they're doing some testing. And if anyone out there is looking for a job, I heard that Apple are already hiring for their 6G team. So there's some positions out there for those that are able to kind of cast the future and be able to predict what is going to happen in the early 2030s. But in terms of use cases, I mean, looking out towards a decade, I saw some really nice work going on in Korea on this with SK Telecom, where they were looking at as a network could deliver terabits per second, we were talking about gigabits per second, but if a network can deliver terabits, what are the possibilities? And then you're thinking about things that have only ever been science fiction in the past. So things like true 3D holographic displays, where you're rendering a person in 3D, and they've got an example of that in their Museum of the Future in Seoul. So there's some wonderful things that we can't even imagine that are going to happen with future generations. But to answer your question on should you should wait for a few years for a phone, no, I think go ahead and get one now, because it's 5G's here for a while and it is evolving.
That sounds amazing. And your mention there of sort of holograms and stuff, I remember when they toured the Diana Ross hologram, and all of the reviews was like, it was a bit creepy and a bit scary. So maybe with the power of 5G or 6G, we'll get something that's a bit more lifelike. Neill Madle, I wanted to sort of ask you how, oh, my questions just slipped away from the screen. Has it been sort of detrimental in the fact that the UK has banned Huawei from our networks? Does that change anything to do with the way we can get connected? Because there are other options out there. So does it make any difference?
No, I think we're pretty agnostic when it comes to this. We don't use Huawei equipment in our own network, and our dark fiber is compatible with pretty much any technology. So I don't think we have a particularly strong view on this. We did acquire a company which did use Huawei, and we've taken it out. So we tend to be pretty agnostic with regards to Huawei.
But I mean, other competitor equipment from like Ericsson and Nokia seems to be not as highly recommended as the Huawei technology. Is it going to handicap sort of the UK's development in this space?
It's a difficult one for me to answer, because I'm not really a 5G or a mobile expert. Where we interact with 5G is in providing that infrastructure that's necessary, the fixed fiber infrastructure is necessary to connect the small cells and densify the small cells to run a 5G network in a town or a city. So we're not terribly embedded in that sort of mobile space to be able to say whether one technology is better than another. So maybe it's better if Alex or the other Neill handle that one.
Alex or Neill Campbell, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit to this one. I think that there's something else that's certainly going on at the edge of the network in the radio space around the RANs, the radio access network, that there's a lot of innovation that's going on in that area as well to help deliver on 5G. The large communication service providers in Europe have come together to promote a technology called Open RAN, which calls on a much more open radio using standard off-the-shelf servers connected to radios, where everything is disaggregated and uses cloud methodologies like used in computing to deliver on providing radios. And I think what that will allow is that there will be many businesses, small businesses as well, medium-sized businesses, that are looking for new innovations that can be delivered on a much more open platform as well. So I think there'll be new players that come into this space, as well as the big guys that are already out there, Huawei, Ericsson, and Nokia.
Cool. I mean, to move away from that slightly, does it matter what sort of connection you're on in terms of having two devices that are essentially talking to each other? So, like I mentioned that I don't have a 5G device. If you were talking to me through a 5G connection, would it matter that I'm on a 4G or potentially a 3G, Alex?
No. So the connection will allow for many different devices, and the radios that I was just talking about there. There are radios for 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. Some are at the same site, some are at separate sites, and then there'll be that that connection to your phone as it goes through the back end, the core network. So it won't make a difference in kind of your kind of consumer use case.
So if, you know, I was trying to have a conversation with somebody, am I right in thinking that it would be sort of, the connection would be as strong as the weakest link?
On a phone call, yeah, it would depend on the strength of your signal. I don't think you'd notice too much on a phone call. In something with data, you know, as I said in kind of that introduction, with 5G, you have better bandwidth, capacity, latency. So that is going to be the better of the two connections.
Neill, what do you think about adding in, you know, a home broadband situation or a wide connection? Would you argue that that is still the sort of better connection over a 5G network?
I would argue that it's the better connection for home use, yes. And if nothing else, you know, the 5G spectrum is quite a precious commodity. You don't want to use it for things it doesn't need to be used for. And there's going to be so much demand with people out and about using their mobile devices that it makes sense to use a complementary technology for home or business use. So I think there are always going to be complementary technologies, and as well, you know, you have small cells that are needed within a mobile network, the types that we're supporting in Swindon, for instance, as part of a 5G rollout, where that they need to be connected to a fixed infrastructure. And one thing about 5G is that it's more susceptible to things like humidity and rain. So you need a line of sight between these cells and users out and about. And they all need to be connected back to what they call macro sites, which need to be connected to a network. So therefore, there's always going to be that sort of fixed fiber infrastructure that's going to play a part in 5G. But when it comes to fiber to the home, then I would argue that's still the optimum broadband experience for home users.
And in areas where, you know, there still isn't great broadband connection, some areas that we see that are more rural end up having very slow speeds. Is there continuing work to develop those areas? Because obviously it's great that we're getting more and more rollout of 5G, but we also need to, is it something that's sort of going hand in hand as opposed to a trade-off of one over the other?
It's pretty much going hand in hand. Yeah, there are programs in place. We focus mostly on urban areas, but we are looking beyond those boundaries now to more rural areas as well as we move forward. And there are government initiatives to support rural broadband rollout. So there's been a lot of work being done in that. I mean, overall, when it comes to full fiber, which I would argue is the kind of future of data downloads, when it comes to full fiber, the UK is way behind a lot of other countries in the world, and we are probably at about 15%-ish of the country that can get access to full fiber, way down on some other countries like the Baltic states or Spain or Portugal or Korea. So these are all up in the sort of 50, 60, 70% range. So we've got a long way to go. We're getting there, and we're getting there quickly through a number of different approaches. So the government is really keen to do this, and they have some pretty ambitious targets for full fiber accessibility by 2025, and that sort of feeds into these sort of 3 to 4 year builds that we're doing in towns and cities around the country.
That sounds awesome. I've just got one last question from the audience before Rod jumps back in. How will 5G latency be lower if processing is being done in the cloud? This question is not one that I can answer. Who in the panel reckons they can give us one a stab?
Yeah, I was talking about that convergence of those two technologies, and when I was talking about the compute being elsewhere, that would be at the edge of the network. So not, a cloud that is very far away, having it as close as possible. And there are some really nice use cases where you would bring that edge computing to the premise. So in a smart factory, for example, you might have a mobile private 5G network alongside computing at that edge of the network there at that same point, where you could deliver a private zone for doing your computing for things like would it be automation or safety or optimization, maintenance, having computing happening that allow for computer vision and being able to send lots of data between many different devices. So that would be a way to reduce the amount of latency compared to the latency to a cloud.
Thank you for that. So I think there's probably lots of other questions and then they'll get very, very technical for some of the audience, I think, as well. I'd like to, at this point, just to thank Shivani and the whole panel. I think there's quite a range of different areas to this, and I particularly like to thank Intel, actually, who just they're one of our fantastic festival partners, and that is not just supporting the public festival, but also supporting with a range of brilliant workshops that are going out to the schools around Swindon. So helping with the schools and students who are learning from home. We're reaching thousands of children in Swindon through that program, and a big part of that is Intel's support. So I want to thank them for that. Shivani is going to be interviewing Jonathan Scott, the author of Vinyl Frontier, later this evening. So if the clue's in the name, if you had to create a mixtape, and we probably, the older of us remember doing that, if you're making a mixtape to send to aliens and send to the stars, what would you do? What would you include? And that's really something NASA have done. So Jonathan can tell the story of that later on, so don't miss that one. And Shivani's also going to be performing tomorrow night in our comedy science panel show, Never Explained, so you can hear some of their comedy too. But all of the panelists today are here for the full weekend in exhibitor booths. So do make sure you check out Intel and CityFibre in the Future of Computing and Communication section in the exhibitors area, and see all their latest work and innovation, and from other organizations too. Intel particularly are doing I've got a careers Q&A going on around 1:30, I think, is that, Alex?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, straight after this.
Yeah, so straight after this, go over there and you can find out how you can get careers in tech, and they'll answer your questions there. And Scientists from the University of Bath, where other Neill is from, have developed a quick and easy approach for capturing 360 VR photography without using expensive special cameras. So pop to their VR photography booth before 3 p.m. to see a live demo. So there's loads going on, actually. So make sure you check out all of those. After this session, could you please take a moment to complete the feedback survey, because it helps us to plan future festivals. We had nearly 200 people on this call today, so that's really, really good. And there's lots of really interesting Q&As. So continue the questions, I think, in the booths. And yeah, one last time, thank you to Shivani, thank you to the panel, and hopefully we'll see you all later on in the festival. Thank you all.